Right, let's bring you this story now. More than a third of young South Africans between the ages of 18 and 24 years, we're told, are hesitant about COVID-19 vaccine. This is according to the latest coronavirus rapid mobile survey. The National Income Dynamic Study, which involved 30 researchers from local universities and science councils, is the most representative vaccine intention results to date. The main reasons cited for vaccine hesitancy were concerns about side effects, doubts around the effectiveness of vaccines, and a distrust of vaccines in general. Professor Ronelle Burger is a researcher at Stellenbosch University's Economics Department and is one of the compilers of this report. She joins us now via our video link for more on this. Prof, great to see you. Thanks very much for making time to chat to us here on Newzroom 405. We'll speak a bit more about young adults and your findings, but perhaps let's contextualize these results as a start. How big a problem is vaccine hesitancy, would you say, in a country like ours?
Well, given the economic and social impacts that we've seen of the pandemic last year, I think the vaccines are essential for us as a country to move forward. And in that way, vaccine hesitancy represents a really serious impediment to moving beyond this pandemic back to a situation where there was greater freedom and where the economy can start to recover fully.
Yeah. Do you have knowledge of how we compare to perhaps our peers in the globe as we try, again, gauging whether or not we should be really concerned or perhaps have a bit more of a sober outlook on what we're finding?
Well, there are many things to bear in mind when we think about these results that we've just released. We are at the bottom end of the countries that were, for instance, surveyed by Ipsos and the World Economic Forum using a similar question in February this year. UK, US is even slightly above the Ipsos estimate. Our estimate, however, is slightly higher than the Ipsos estimate for South Africa, and that would put us above the US, but still well below most of the other countries in Europe, like the UK. We are above France and we are above Russia, but I think that should not be any source of comfort. I think it is really worrying. Two other things that we should bear in mind is firstly that there's, of course, quite a big difference between intention and action, but normally that means that there's even greater reluctance than what the survey would demonstrate. So we might even have much lower levels of take-up than the survey has shown. But I think there is also sort of some cause for caution in over-interpreting hesitancy. We don't have vaccines available yet. And I think it is still for many of us a very abstract notion. And it might be that as it becomes part of daily life, and as we hear about neighbors who have been vaccinated and, they're feeling well, they're not getting COVID, they're not becoming ill, that some of the hesitancy is sort of naturally eroded. But for that to happen, we must have enough take-up in a community for this kind of real-life experience to affect people's prejudices and fears.
You make a good point. That said, we're seeing those levels of hesitancy sort of really pronounced in that age group I mentioned, those between the ages of 18 and 24. Let me guess, social media has something to do with this, surely.
It probably has something to do with it because we also find that there's a 7 percentage point higher likelihood for vaccine hesitancy amongst respondents to our survey who say that they trust social media as a source of information about COVID. But of course, what we should also bear in mind is that we find that a mortality risk is very highly correlated to a higher willingness to be vaccinated. And conversely, we would expect that if the mortality risk you face is very low, as it would be for this age group, that they would be more reluctant to take up vaccines and would be less willing. So it could just be that. But I think if we are aiming for a population-wide immunization, we need to think innovatively about how to reach this population group, how to reach this demographic age group.
Yeah, absolutely. Does it matter, Prof, where these young people are in the country? Is there a correlation between geographical location and the level of hesitancy that you're seeing?
The results are all based on a multivariate analysis. We also controlled for districts. So the age effect is robust. But in some of the descriptive analysis, the bivariates, we see that there seems to be higher reluctance and greater hesitancy amongst the Western Cape and the Northern Cape. And I must warn that this comes with a little bit of a cautionary note. The survey wasn't designed to be representative on provincial level, but these effects are so large that we feel that we can talk about them. And that we also see, sort of seemingly in parallel, a bigger effect amongst the Afrikaans group. The Afrikaans language, home language speakers are also more likely to be hesitant, which I think is concerning.
That's interesting. I don't think many people would have predicted that. Are you able to tell us a bit more about that finding?
Well, what we can see is that it is driven by language. His surveys are frustrating because, we only have that much, what the survey questions can tell us. What we can see is that it's not a race effect. It's not an income effect. And it doesn't seem to be predominantly a province effect. It seems to be a language effect that is coming through. And I think what lies beyond that, below that, what drives it, we would need to wait for our next survey. Because in our next survey, we were able to ask open-ended questions and more additional probes. So we hope that, I think within about 5 weeks, we should be able to give you more information about that finding.
Yeah. Speaking about dates and timelines, I wonder how the progression of the pandemic actually affects sentiments towards things like vaccines. I think there are heightened sensibilities now because there's so much talk around a third wave. Reports emerging even this morning, apparently members of the Command Council saying that the minister is sounding the alarm early because he can foresee more suffering coming in the weeks to come. If you were to conduct that survey today, for instance, do you think your findings would be different?
Maybe. I think you're absolutely right. I think the perceived risk and the immediacy of the threat would influence hesitancy. But I think what we should also flag is that our survey happened in February and first week of March, and that was before the whole blood clotting halt of vaccinations occurred in the US and in South Africa. And we are concerned that that would have increased hesitancy. So to both sides, there are, uncertainty about how the picture in February would differ from the picture right now.
Absolutely. It's all so fascinating. Take me through some of the questions that remain unanswered for you.
I think the big questions would be about how we turn this around and how we affect this. I think one of the most interesting things is really that there seems to be huge amounts of uncertainty underlying both the yeses and the nos. So what we expect to happen in the next round is that some of the yeses would have become nos and some of the nos would have become yeses, because our survey is a longitudinal survey, which means we talk to exactly the same people in wave 5 as we did in wave 4. And because of it, we can see how individuals change their minds. And what has been observed overseas is that there is a lot of flip-flopping, a lot of uncertainty still. So I think understanding how one speaks to that uncertainty and to understand the combination of scientific information and also speaking to the hearts of people, that we need to inject into a campaign to ensure that we have success. I think to understand that is really important, and our next round of questions try to probe that, try to really understand. We had a question to ask, we had a few questions to ask, what would convince you to take vaccination? And I think that's really what we care about, right?
Absolutely, yeah. At the very least, the work that happens in institutions of higher learning should translate in change in the communities in which they operate. I can't wait to get the results of your next studies. This is certainly an interesting area of study. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your insights with the time we had on the AM Report. Professor Ronelle Burger is with Stellenbosch University's Economics Department, no less, joining us there via our video link. Prof, once again, thanks very much indeed.